Hello, welcome to the program. Ahead, visiting global media agency chief Charles Courtier from MEC is going to be telling us what he's seeing in world ad markets and what it all means for Australia. Plus, Kyle Sandilands in hot water again and Thames high hopes for being Lara Bingle. But first, some Fairfax journalists have gone on strike over plans to move around 60 editorial production jobs at 9 of its regional titles to New Zealand. News Limited is also reportedly set to announce hundreds of job cuts. The newspaper industry is battling a continued slump in sales of print copies and that tricky transition to becoming digital businesses. In a moment, we'll get the view of Charles Courtier from MEC. First, though, let's go to our co-host James Manning, the editor and publisher of Mediaweek, with the details of this story. Firstly, what changes has Fairfax got planned?
Well, they're outsourcing some of the production jobs, some of the sub-editing, putting together the newspapers at their regional at Wollongong and Newcastle in regional New South Wales, and some of the sort of suburban titles, if you like, associated with that. They're moving offshore to New Zealand. They're not all job losses. They're offering I think redundancy, or people willing to relocate to New Zealand, I think, can actually take up the opportunity there. There's talk overall there's savings of maybe $5 million, but by the time half of that will be eaten up in the costs of people in New Zealand doing it. So I think the sort of net savings are a bit over $2 million to Fairfax.
Have you noticed much impact yet from the strike on the actual publications or online?
They were a little bit light today, but then the strike was called quite late on Wednesday this week, so a lot of the stories had already been filed for Thursday's papers. Friday could be a bit more of a challenge. There'll be a lot of a newswire copy, you would imagine, and it won't be good news for the Saturday papers either. Well, I think staff go back on 9 a.m. Friday at this stage, so there could be a lot of late editorial being put together for those big weekend papers. And
this is interesting because it all comes as Gina Reinhardt ups her pressure on the Fairfax board about its strategy, publicly criticising the chairman, Roger Corbett, this week. What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, it's a massive crunch time for Fairfax. I mean, for all newspaper publishers. I think they'll, there has to be some meeting, you would think, eventually between perhaps the chairman and Reinhardt, I'm not sure, or some olive branch offered to her to come in, I think Corbett's been away overseas this week, but he's indicated that, look, he'll go out and visit major shareholders when he comes back to put their side of what's going on. But, she started off calling for Corbett to, he needs to sort of lift his game and the board, and then she sort of said, look, it's management as well that need to work to revive the company.
So how bad are the recent circulation numbers at Fairfax?
Well, we've talked about before, yeah, they're down significantly. Fairfax say they're weeding out, circulation that's, not critical to advertisers, and Simon Davies from OMD the other week talked to us a little bit about that and said, yeah, look, they're still getting a pretty good audience, but it's just not an overall look, a good look. Will they keep falling? That's the question a lot of people want to ask.
And we saw last week the AFR launch its iPad app, and it's been talking about the number of downloads it's had.
Yes, in the first couple of days, something like 15,000 downloads. They said, look, they were only budgeting for 4,000, maybe 6,000 in the first couple of months, so it's wildly exceeded that. But the number of app downloads doesn't necessarily translate into the people that use it. If you look at some of the numbers Fairfax have released about The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald downloads, in the hundreds of thousands, but the people that actually go back and become regular users is quite, a tiny fraction of that.
And this all comes to, there's been reports that News Limited is set to announce job losses, and these reports are of anywhere between 400 to 1,000 job cuts.
Yeah, there's no one sort of commenting officially on what the numbers might be. It was thought it might happen, there'd be some clarity or an announcement next week. That's not going to be the case, but there's no dates yet. But there will be some, a statement on about how the company is refocusing and the sort of extent of the staff that will be affected.
And this all comes, again, as we've had pretty dire news from, the UK overnight with the merging of the Daily Mirror and its Sunday edition, and also two US newspaper publishers starting to axe their midweek editions. Yeah,
Trinity Mirror, got rid of the editor of the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror. They've gone to a 7-day model. There'll be one overall editor for the brand, with a weekend and a weekday I don't know if they're calling them editors, but a controller reporting to that editor. Again, they're searching for a better way, a more economical way to do it. In the US, yeah, you know, and in Canada, they're cutting out Sunday editions. Some of the weekday editions are disappearing as they try and monetise that daily audience to a cheaper online model.
Thanks for that, James. Well, let's get some insights now from our special guest on the show this week, global ad agency boss Charles Courtier. He's the global chief executive of the media agency MEC, which this month celebrated its 10th anniversary. It's part of the ad and media giant WPP group of companies. Charles, thanks so much for coming on the program. I just firstly thought if you could sort of set the scene for us and just explain what MEC does, because you're in, what, about 84 countries or something?
Yes, we have about 5,000 people across 84 countries, and we're one of the top 5 media agencies in the world, part of WPP, as you point out.
And do you, I mean, there's 4 companies, I think, operating in this market, part of the overall group. Do you end up sort of competing with each other a little bit?
We do a bit of both. So we collaborate. We exist under one group as Group M. So there's a lot from a sort of volume and leverage point of view where we collaborate together. And yes, we are competitors as well. Yes.
I wanted to ask you, because obviously a big topic is, you know, the future, the outlook for the newspaper publishers. What do you think? I mean, are we starting to see the beginning of the end for the traditional print editions?
Well, I think there's a difference between magazines and newspapers, first of all, and I think that magazines are stagnant around the world, but not falling. Where the problem is clearly in newspapers, where particularly in North America, here in Australia, and also much of Western Europe as well, you know, the circulations and revenues of newspapers are going backwards. Definitely we're in a period of rationalisation. They cannot all survive. So certainly the market is going to thin out. I think they will adapt to a greater degree than we're probably giving them credit for at the moment, but they need to get digital and get paid for being digital quickly. But certainly there's going to be a rationalisation. There will be less newspapers in the future than there are now, that's for sure.
Another big debate is, will people pay for, you know, digital news online that the newspapers have perhaps foolishly been giving away for free up until now?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a hurdle that the consumer needs to get over?
Yes, and I think that the consumer is not going to pay for just pure news. I think the consumer considers news to be free, and let's face it, if you want the headlines, you definitely don't need to pay for it. But I think that newspapers that adapt and can bring value beyond just straight news, I think have a future. And I think it'll be a combination of, you know, of online or on tablets mostly, and the physical newspaper. I think typically you may well find that sort of Monday to Friday newspapers are on tablet, and the Saturday and Sunday paper, where you really want to put your feet up with your cup of coffee, whatever it is, will continue to be in the physical form. I think they'll adapt some way like that.
Just looking past just newspapers as well, and that news business, and looking at online generally, how can this deliver for advertisers? Because, I mean, we do see some questions about advertising online, especially, I mean, when you look at a company like Facebook, which has nearly, what, 1 billion users, and yet even there are questions about how it's going to monetise that.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and I think we're at the very early stages of that. But, you know, but the revenue growth, if you look at ad spend growth, all the growth is really in digital. So sort of plus 16% is the prediction for this year globally. And again, I think that what digital offers is great engagement between it and the consumer. But I think you're right, that I think we're at very early stages of how is that engagement really going to work. Facebook is a very good example of that. It has all the audience, but not yet the real sort of, you know, consumer engagement from a commercial perspective. But I think that will come. I mean, their future depends on it, along with everyone else's. So I think it'll adapt, it'll come.
Charles, you're working on the front line in Europe. You speak to the advertisers. some big challenging economic times over there. Are those rocky countries, are they affecting overall the sort of confidence and the spending on advertising in Europe?
Yes, definitely. I think that Western Europe and the US are having difficult times, you know, in this business at the moment. The US is pretty flat, and Western Europe has a lot of problems, and I think it affects confidence severely, and ad spend is hugely affected by the confidence in the business marketplace. So, you know, the world looks to Central and Eastern Europe plus Asia Pacific in general for its growth, and Latin America. In fact, Latin America is probably the fastest growing of all the regions right now, but from a very low base. But it's going to take some growth to make up for the stagnant Western Europe and the US. So that is a problem for this year, certainly.
Do you see, is Australia sort of being dragged into the mess then along with it? What's your sort of predictions for what you're seeing?
My personal prediction for Australia is actually pretty buoyant. I mean, I think that when we look to the Asia-Pacific region overall, to dig us out of, you know, the global hole, Australia is one of those markets that we look at and think, you know, there's real growth there. So China, India, Taiwan and Australia would be sort of the four markets that we have high hopes for.
And have you been speaking to many advertisers or media executives in Australia the week you've been here, and what's the feeling you get off them about the outlook here?
Well, they're asking me the same questions that you're asking me, actually. And but you know, I think they're nervous too. I think everyone is about the global economy, so they are nervous. But I think Australia feels and is somewhat protected from the worst ravages of what's going on, particularly in Western Europe. I do realise that it affects everyone in the end, but I think you are somewhat protected on this side of the world.
Can you give us any insights into what you're seeing in perhaps trends globally and ad spending patterns?
Well, I think, you know, all the talk is about mobile, and I think that, again, I think it's one of those things that everybody knows it's going to be hugely important. Nobody quite knows how we're going to monetize it either, but everyone knows it's going to be so big that you don't walk away from it. But I think that, you know, I think mobile and I think social media, which tends to get translated always as Facebook, but potentially it's much more than just Facebook. But I think, you know, how social media and how mobile will fuse together and be the medium of the future for us, I think is the preoccupation with the industry.
And that's tied into we're getting lots of surveys now about the 3 screens and people multitasking at home. And that's all tied into that mobile thing and the effect that will have on traditional media too, I guess.
Yes, but I actually think it's helping traditional media. I mean, television has never really been more healthy than it is right now, and I think that's partly because, you know, the number of opportunities to see programming, you know, is multiplies by the number of screens that are around. But also look at the content that's being created for television now. It's having a real, you know, new birth of. There's a lot of great programming coming, particularly out of the States at the moment. You know, there seems to be more interest in content on television than movies, which is, you know, traditionally not been the case.
I just wanted to quickly touch on some other sectors as well. Radio, what are you seeing there? It's one of those sectors that, you know, the end has been sort of predicted for years, but it's really hung in there.
Yes.
What do you think? I mean, is digital and streaming going to be the future for it?
I think radio will continue to hang in there. I think you're right. I think it's the sort of the sleeper of the category always, isn't it? But it continues to do well. I think digital radio, the internet in general, is fantastic for radio in general, because it's given it a new lease of life. Any genre of radio you want, it's out there if you're prepared to find it. So I feel good. I feel a good prognosis for radio.
And quickly on out-of-home too, there's been a lot of investment here, people looking to invest in out-of-home companies. It's seen as a bit of a dynamic industry. You don't have to put up with pesky ratings for attached content, you just put your ad out there. How's that look around the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, out-of-home is growing as well, so there's plenty that isn't, and out-of-home certainly is growing, so I think that's good, and I think it's becoming very much, you know, a sort of key broadcast medium, and it actually plays well digitally as well. There are so many, you know, there are so many things that you can do digitally with out-of-home as well. So again, good prognosis, I think.
Been great to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Charles Courtier there, Global CEO of MEC. Stay with us. Coming up on Media Week, all the TV ratings news.